The grand hall of the flagship stretched wider than any room Daniel Hayes had ever seen. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they disappeared into shadow, and the walls glowed with soft purple light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. He stood near the entrance in his formal diplomatic uniform, feeling very small and very human among the dozens of alien species filling the space. Ambassador Lydia Grant walked beside him with the confidence of someone who had spent 20 years negotiating with beings from across the galaxy. She leaned close and whispered that he needed to smile more, the valued warmth during formal gatherings. Daniel forced his lips upward, but his heart was not in it. 3 months ago his wife had signed the divorce papers. 2 months ago he had volunteered for this deep space assignment because Earth held too many memories. 1 month ago he had learned that they were famous for two things. Their warriors were unmatched in combat. Their marriage bonds were considered the most sacred in the known galaxy. He found both facts irritating for reasons he did not want to examine. The banquet tables curved in great arcs across the hall, loaded with foods from 100 worlds. Daniel took his assigned seat between a small, furry ambassador from the collective and an empty chair meant for someone important. He poured himself a glass of dark wine and drank deeply. It tasted like blackberries and regret. The empty chair beside him filled suddenly with the largest person Daniel had ever seen. She stood 7 feet tall with skin the color of deep purple storms. 4 arms emerged from her broad shoulders, each one thick with muscle. Her eyes were golden and sharp, and when she sat down the chair groaned under her weight. "Commander Eth," said Ambassador Grant from across the table, "it is an honor to have the hero of the Darkness War dining with us." Eth nodded once. Her voice was deep and smooth like distant thunder. "The honor belongs to those who seek peace through understanding." She turned those golden eyes toward Daniel. "You are the cultural, the one who studies how species live and love and bond." Daniel swallowed his wine too fast and coughed. "That is correct. I document cultural practices for the human archives." He refilled his glass, mostly the boring stuff: marriage customs, funeral rites, coming-of-age ceremonies. Eth tilted her head. "You find such things boring." He shrugged. "I find them overstated. People make too much fuss about rituals that usually end in disappointment." The table grew quieter. Several nearby turned to look at him. Ambassador Grant made a small warning sound in her throat, but Daniel was already on his third glass of wine and feeling reckless with old pain. An elder named Oran spoke from the far end of the table. "Perhaps the human does not understand our ways. Among our people, the marriage bond is sealed through combat. Both partners must prove they are worthy of protecting each other. It is the highest honor one can achieve." Daniel laughed. It came out sharper than he intended. "So you beat each other up and call it love. Very romantic." The silence that followed was so complete that Daniel could hear his own heartbeat. Everyone in the hall had stopped moving. Even the servants carrying platters of food stood frozen like statues. Eth rose slowly from her chair. All 4 of her hands curled into fists the size of human heads. Her golden eyes had turned cold and hard like ancient metal. "You mock the sacred bond," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the entire hall. "You insult the foundation of honor. You spit upon the memory of every warrior who has bled to prove their love worthy." Daniel's wine-soaked brain finally caught up with his mouth. He looked around at the frozen faces of his diplomatic team. Ambassador Grant had gone pale. The other human delegates were staring at him with horror. "I did not mean to offend," he started. Eth cut him off with a gesture of her upper right hand. "Offense has been given. Under law, such insult can only be answered one way." She stepped back from the table and her voice rose to fill the hall. "I challenge this human to ritual combat. He will face me in the arena and prove whether his words carry the weight of conviction or the emptiness of cowardice." Daniel stood up so fast his chair fell over. "Wait. I am just a cultural. I study documents. I write reports. I have never fought anyone in my life." "Then you will learn," Eth said, "or you will yield and your people will leave this summit in disgrace. The choice belongs to you." Ambassador Grant rushed around the table and grabbed Daniel's arm. Her fingers dug in hard enough to bruise. "Commander Eth, surely there is another way to resolve this misunderstanding." Our spoke carelessly, but he meant no true disrespect. Eth's golden eyes moved to the ambassador. "There is no other way. Yor has been given a great gift. He has been offered the chance to prove his worth through combat with the finest warrior of her generation. Most would consider this an honor beyond measure." Daniel felt the wine turning sour in his stomach. He looked at Eth, at her 4 powerful arms and her towering frame, at the way even the other warriors looked at her with respect and fear. She could break him in half without trying. She could probably break him in quarters. "What happens if I refuse?" he asked. "Then your insult stands unanswered. Your people will be expelled from this summit. They will vote against human membership in the Galactic Assembly. Your species will remain isolated and alone in a universe that has no patience for those without honor." Daniel closed his eyes. He thought about Earth. He thought about the billions of humans who were counting on this diplomatic mission to succeed. He thought about how his stupid, broken heart and his careless words had just endangered everything. He opened his eyes and looked at the warrior who would almost certainly kill him. "I accept your challenge," he said. His voice barely shook at all. Eth smiled for the first time. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just been given permission to hunt. "Then prepare yourself, human. In 3 days we meet in the arena, and you will learn what the sacred bond truly means." She turned and walked away, the crowd parting before her like water before a ship. Daniel watched her go and wondered if he would survive long enough to regret this moment properly. Ambassador Grant released his arm and sighed heavily. She said nothing. She did not need to. The disappointment in her eyes was louder than any words could be. Daniel looked down at his empty wine glass and wished he had never left Earth at all. The human quarters aboard the flagship were comfortable but felt like a prison cell to Daniel. He sat on the edge of his bed with his head in his hands, while Ambassador Grant paced back and forth across the small room. Her footsteps were loud against the metal floor, and each one felt like a hammer striking his skull. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" she asked for the 5th time. Daniel nodded without looking up. "I ruined everything, I know." "Ruin does not begin to cover it." Lydia stopped packing and stood in front of him. Her voice dropped lower. 20 years I have worked toward this moment. 20 years of building relationships across the galaxy. And you destroyed it in 30 seconds because you cannot handle your own heartbreak. He finally looked up. His eyes were red and tired. "You know about that." "Everyone knows about it, Daniel. You volunteered for deep space duty 3 days after your divorce was finalized. You have been bitter and angry since the moment you stepped aboard this ship." She sat down on the chair across from him. "I had hoped the work would help you heal. Instead, you decided to insult the most sacred tradition of the most powerful warrior species in the quadrant." Daniel had no response to that. She was right about everything. There was a soft chime at the door. Lydia stood and opened it to reveal a she did not recognize. He was old, his purple skin faded to a lighter shade, and he walked with a slight limp. But his eyes were sharp and curious. "I am Oran," he said. "May I speak with the human who challenged our ways?" Lydia looked back at Daniel. He shrugged and nodded. She stepped aside to let the elder enter. Oran moved slowly across the room and lowered himself into a chair with a grunt of effort. His 4 arms folded across his chest as he studied Daniel with the patience of someone who had seen many young fools in his long life. "You do not believe in the sacred bond," the elder said. It was not a question. Daniel shook his head. "I believed in it once. Marriage, I mean, human marriage. I thought it meant something real. I was wrong." "Tell me about your wrongness." Daniel blinked. No one had asked him that before. Everyone had offered sympathy or advice or judgment. No one had simply asked him to explain. He took a breath and let the words come. I was married for 4 years. I thought we would be together forever. I thought she felt the same way. But one day she told me she had found someone else, someone better. She said our bond had been a mistake from the beginning. He paused. So I learned that bonds can be broken. That promises mean nothing. That love is just a word people use until they find something more convenient. Oran listened in silence. When Daniel finished, the elder nodded slowly. Your mate betrayed you, he said, and you decided that all bonds were false because yours was broken. Something like that. The elder leaned forward. Among my people, such betrayal would be punished by death. The sacred bond is not merely a promise. It is a fusion of two souls into one purpose. To break it is to destroy part of yourself. He paused. But I think you already know what that feels like. Daniel said nothing. His throat was too tight for words. Oran continued. Eth is the finest warrior of her generation. She has faced 47 suitors in the arena and defeated them all. They wanted to possess her, to claim her strength as their own. She saw through their desires and found them unworthy. Great, Daniel muttered. So I am going to get killed by someone who has already beaten 47 trained warriors. Perhaps, Oran smiled slightly. Or perhaps not. You see, our combat rituals are not merely about strength. They are about revealing the truth of one's heart. A warrior who fights only for victory will eventually fall. A warrior who fights for something greater can endure beyond all reason. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? It means that you have something the 47 suitors did not have. You have nothing left to lose. You have already been broken. What more can she take from you? The elder rose slowly and moved toward the door. He paused and looked back. One more thing. As the challenged party, you have the right to set the terms of combat. Choose wisely, human. And remember that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from winning but from refusing to surrender. He left without another word. Daniel stared at the closed door for a long time. Lydia sat down beside him. She was quiet for a moment before speaking. I managed to confirm what he said. You can choose the terms. Daniel nodded slowly. An idea was forming in his mind. It was probably stupid. It was definitely desperate, but it was all he had. He spent the next 2 days watching recordings of duels. He studied how they fought, how they moved, how they won and lost. He noticed patterns. The matches were usually short. Warriors were overwhelming in their attacks and their opponents fell quickly. But the rules allowed for endurance matches, fights that continued until one party yielded or could no longer stand. No time limit, no restrictions on how long the punishment continued. Daniel watched one such match from 50 years ago. A smaller had faced a champion twice her size. She lost every exchange. She was beaten bloody, but she refused to yield for 6 hours until her opponent finally collapsed from exhaustion. She had won by refusing to break. On the morning of the 3rd day, Daniel stood before the council and announced his terms. The fight would continue until one party yielded or could not stand. There would be no time limit. He would not be allowed weapons, but neither would he be required to attack. He only had to survive. Eth listened to his terms with an unreadable expression. When he finished, she nodded once. You choose to be a target rather than a fighter, she said. You think your human stubbornness will outlast my strength. Daniel met her golden eyes without flinching. I think I have spent the last year refusing to let pain break me. A few more hours should not make much difference. Something flickered in her expression. It might have been respect. It might have been pity. Daniel could not tell the difference. Then prepare yourself, she said. Tomorrow we learn what you are truly made of. Daniel bowed slightly and walked away. His hands were shaking, but he kept them steady until he was out of sight. Then he found a quiet corner and let the fear wash over him in waves. He was going to fight a warrior who had never lost. He was going to absorb punishment that would break bones and tear flesh. He was going to suffer more than he had ever suffered in his life. But he was not going to yield. No matter what happened, he was not going to give up. It was the only thing he had left that was truly his own. The arena was a perfect circle carved from stone that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Thousands of seats rose in tiers around it, filled with spectators from dozens of species. Daniel had never seen so many different beings in one place. There were tall creatures with clicking mandibles, short furry beings with too many eyes, floating entities that seemed to be made entirely of light, and everywhere the purple-skinned watching with golden eyes full of anticipation. Daniel walked through the entrance tunnel toward the fighting floor. His footsteps echoed against the ancient stone. He wore only light training clothes and soft shoes. No armor, no weapons, nothing but his body and his will. The roar of the crowd hit him like a physical force when he emerged into the light. He squinted against the brightness and tried not to look at the thousands of faces staring down at him. Instead, he focused on the center of the arena where Eth waited. She was magnificent in her ceremonial combat gear. Dark metal plates covered her vital areas but left her 4 arms free to move. Each hand held a different traditional weapon, a curved blade, a heavy club, a barbed whip, a spiked gauntlet. She looked like war itself given physical form. Daniel stopped 10 paces from her and waited. An elder stepped forward to announce the terms of the duel. His voice carried across the arena without effort. The challenged party has chosen endurance combat. The match continues until one party yields or cannot stand. There is no time limit. The challenged party has waived his right to weapons. He must only survive. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was unusual. Most humans would have chosen a quick defeat rather than prolonged suffering. The spectators leaned forward with new interest. The elder raised his hand. Let the truth of hearts be revealed. Begin. Eth moved faster than Daniel's eyes could follow. Her lower left arm swung the club in a wide arc that caught him in the ribs before he could even think about dodging. He felt bones crack. The force of the blow lifted him off his feet and sent him tumbling across the stone floor. He lay there for a moment, gasping for air that would not come. Pain radiated through his chest in hot waves. The crowd was silent, waiting to see if the human would yield after a single strike. Daniel pushed himself up onto his hands and knees, then onto his feet. He swayed but did not fall. Eth watched him with those golden eyes. She had not moved from her starting position. "You can still yield," she said. "There is no shame in admitting you are outmatched." Daniel spat blood onto the stone floor. "I have been outmatched before. It did not stop me then either." She came at him again. The whip sang through the air and wrapped around his leg, barbs digging into flesh. She yanked and he fell hard. The club came down on his shoulder, more bones cracking. The blade sliced across his back, shallow but bloody. He screamed. He could not help it. The pain was beyond anything he had ever experienced. It was fire and ice and lightning all at once, tearing through his body without mercy. But when she stepped back to observe her work, he started climbing to his feet again. The crowd murmured. A few spectators from other species began pointing and whispering. The human was still moving. The human was still fighting. Eth tilted her head. "You are weaker than I expected. Slower, softer. Why do you not yield?" Daniel managed a bloody grin. "Because yielding is easy. Standing up is hard. I have had enough easy in my life." She attacked again, and again, and again. Time lost all meaning in the arena. Daniel stopped counting the blows. He stopped trying to dodge or block. He simply focused on one thing. Every time he fell, he would stand again. Every time she knocked him down, he would rise. His nose broke in the first hour. 2 more ribs cracked in the second. By the 3rd hour, he could barely see through the swelling around his eyes. His body was a landscape of bruises and cuts and breaks. But he kept standing. The crowd had changed. What started as bloodthirsty anticipation had become something else, something quieter. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy watched a small, broken human refuse to stay down. Some began to cheer when he rose. Others fell silent with something that looked like wonder. Eth was breathing harder now, not from exhaustion but from confusion. She had faced 47 warriors in this arena. All of them had been stronger than this human. All of them had been faster. And all of them had eventually yielded when the pain became too much. This one would not stop. She hit him with a combination that should have ended the fight. Club to the stomach, blade across the thigh, whip to the face. He went down in a heap of bloody limbs and did not move for a long moment. The elder stepped forward, ready to declare the match finished. Then Daniel's hand twitched. His fingers dug into the stone floor. Slowly, impossibly, he began to pull himself upright again. Eth stood over him. Her chest heaved with emotions she did not recognize. "Yield," she commanded. "You have proven your courage. There is no need to die here." Daniel looked up at her through eyes nearly swollen shut. His voice came out as a croak. "I mocked something sacred because I was hurt and angry. If I yield now, my insult stands. Your tradition remains dishonored." He coughed and more blood came up. "I would rather die on my feet than live knowing I was too weak to make things right." He stood, somehow he stood. His legs shook so badly he could barely stay upright. One arm hung useless at his side. Blood dripped from a dozen wounds onto the stone floor. But he stood. Eth did not move. Her weapons hung loose in her 4 hands. She stared at this impossible creature who should have broken hours ago, who should have yielded after the first blow, who had no business still breathing let alone standing. She asked him a question that no had ever asked during ritual combat. "Why do you keep fighting when you cannot win?" Daniel smiled through the blood. His answer would change everything. The arena had fallen completely silent. Thousands of spectators held their breath as the broken human swayed before the greatest warrior of her generation. Blood pooled at his feet. His body was a map of damage that should have been fatal hours ago. Yet somehow he remained standing. Eth's question hung in the air between them. "Why do you keep fighting when you cannot win?" Daniel took a shuddering breath that made his cracked ribs scream in protest. He had to think carefully about his answer. Not because he wanted to impress anyone, but because he finally understood something important about himself. "I keep fighting," he said slowly, "because I was wrong." The words echoed across the silent arena. Eth's golden eyes narrowed, but she did not speak. She waited for him to continue. Daniel forced his legs to stay steady. Every word cost him pain, but he kept talking. "3 days ago I mocked your sacred bond. I called it primitive and meaningless. I said those things because my own bond was broken, and I wanted everyone else to feel the same emptiness I felt." He paused to cough. More blood came up, he ignored it. "But standing here, taking your punishment for hours, I realized something. You were not just defending a tradition. You were defending the idea that some things are worth fighting for, that love and commitment are not weaknesses to be mocked, but strengths to be honored." Eth lowered her weapon slightly. Her expression had shifted from confusion to something deeper. What do humans believe about the sacred bond? Daniel thought about his failed marriage. He thought about the promises he had made and the promises that had been broken. He thought about what he had believed before bitterness had poisoned his heart. "We call it marriage," he said. "We promise to stand beside each other through good times and bad, through sickness and health, through every challenge life throws at us. We promise to be partners in everything, to protect each other, to fight for each other." He swallowed painfully. "At least that is what it is supposed to mean." "And your bond was broken," Eth said softly. "Yes, my wife found someone else. She told me our promises meant nothing. She left and took half my heart with her." "So you decided all bonds were lies?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I was hurt and I was angry. I wanted the whole universe to be as empty as I felt inside. When you talked about fighting to prove your love worthy, I heard only more pain waiting to happen. I did not see the beauty in it. I only saw another chance to be betrayed. Eth studied him for a long moment. Her forearms relaxed at her sides. The weapons that had caused him so much damage now seemed almost forgotten. You could have said this 3 days ago, she pointed out. You could have apologized without entering the arena. I could have, Daniel agreed. But words are cheap. Anyone can apologize when there is no cost. Standing here, bleeding, broken, fighting until I cannot fight anymore, that is how I prove I truly understand what I dishonored. Something changed in Eth's posture. The warrior who had never lost a combat challenge looked at the human who had never won a single exchange. She saw not weakness but a different kind of strength. Not skill but something rarer. She saw a heart that refused to break no matter how much damage his body took. I have defeated 47 suitors in this arena, she said. All of them wanted to possess me. They fought to prove they were strong enough to claim the greatest warrior as their prize. She shook her head slowly. Not one of them understood what the sacred bond truly means. Daniel blinked through swollen eyes. What does it mean? It means finding someone worth fighting beside. Not someone to possess, but someone to protect. Someone whose strength makes you stronger. Someone whose heart gives your battles meaning. She paused. My suitors wanted to own my strength. You are the first to fight for something other than yourself. I am not fighting for myself, Daniel admitted. I am fighting for an idea I had given up on. I am fighting to prove that the sacred bond matters even if my own bond failed. Eth made a decision in that moment. It broke every tradition her people had honored for thousands of years. But traditions existed to serve truth, not the other way around. She dropped her weapons. All four hit the stone floor with echoing clangs. The crowd gasped. In 47 previous duels, Eth had never disarmed herself. She had never shown mercy. She had never stopped until her opponent yielded or fell unconscious. This match is not over, she announced. Her voice carried across the arena with the weight of authority, but its nature has changed. I do not wish to defeat this human. I wish to understand him. Daniel stared at her in confusion. What? Eth stepped closer. Her golden eyes were warm now instead of cold. You have taken punishment that would have killed most warriors. You have refused to yield even when your body was destroyed. You fought not for pride or possession, but for the honor of something you once believed in. She reached out with her upper right hand and touched his bloody cheek gently. When you are healed, she said softly, I would like to share a meal with you. I would like to hear more about human marriage. I would like to understand how a creature so fragile can have a heart so unbreakable. Daniel's legs finally gave out. The exhaustion and blood loss caught up with him all at once. He collapsed toward the stone floor. But Eth caught him before he hit the ground. All four arms wrapped around his broken body and lifted him as easily as a parent lifts a sleeping child. The crowd did not know how to react. Some cheered. Some sat in stunned silence. The representatives from other species whispered to each other in confusion. This had never happened before. The greatest warrior of them was carrying her defeated opponent from the arena not as a trophy but as something precious. Oran watched from the stands with tears in his old eyes. He had studied history for 200 years. He had seen countless duels and countless bonds formed through combat, but he had never seen anything like this. The human had come to the arena expecting to prove his endurance. Instead, he had revealed his heart. And in doing so, he had touched something in Eth that 47 warriors had failed to reach. As she carried Daniel through the exit tunnel, she whispered something only he could hear. You asked what happens when you cannot win. Now you know. Sometimes the greatest victory is showing who you truly are. Daniel smiled through the blood and pain. Then he finally let unconsciousness take him. He had survived. But more than that, he had found something he thought was lost forever. He had found hope. 3 months had passed since the arena. Daniel stood before the mirror in his quarters at the human embassy and studied the man looking back at him. The bruises had faded. The broken bones had healed, but the scars remained, thin white lines across his skin that told the story of the day he refused to break. He adjusted the collar of his formal jacket and took a deep breath. Today was the day everything would change. Ambassador Lydia Grant knocked on his door and entered without waiting for permission. She had earned that right after spending 3 months helping him navigate the most complicated diplomatic situation in human history. She looked him over with a critical eye and nodded approval. "You clean up well for someone who nearly died in front of 10,000 aliens," she said. Daniel smiled. "I had good medical care. The regeneration technology is impressive." "That is not what saved you, and we both know it." Lydia stepped closer and straightened his collar unnecessarily. "Your stubbornness saved you. Your refusal to quit saved you." She paused. "She saved you." Daniel's smile softened at the mention of Eth. "Yes, she did." The past 3 months had been a revelation. After he recovered enough to walk, Eth had kept her promise about sharing meals. They had eaten together every day, talking for hours about their different cultures. She taught him basic combat stances and laughed when he fell over during simple exercises. He taught her about human music and watched her cry the first time she heard a symphony. They argued about philosophy. They debated the nature of honor. They discovered that despite coming from worlds separated by thousands of light years, they understood each other in ways that explanation. Somewhere along the way, Daniel had stopped feeling broken. "The Galactic Assembly voted last week," Lydia said. "Humanity was granted full membership. Every representative cited your performance in the arena as proof that humans belonged among the stars." She shook her head in wonder. "You turned a diplomatic disaster into our greatest triumph." "I just stood up a lot," Daniel said. "Anyone could have done it." Lydia's voice was firm. "Not anyone. You showed the galaxy what human endurance really means. You showed them that we do not quit, we do not surrender, we do not break no matter how much pain we face. That is not something anyone could have done. That is something only you did." Daniel had no response to that. He had never thought of himself as special. He had simply been too stubborn to lie down and die. Lydia checked the time on her communicator. "You should go. She is waiting for you." Daniel nodded and walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold and looked back. "Lydia, I never thanked you properly, for not giving up on me, for believing I could fix my mistake." She waved him off, but her eyes were shining. "Go, do not keep her waiting. And Daniel, be happy. You have earned it." The gardens of the embassy were famous throughout the quadrant. Bioluminescent flowers in 100 colors lit the winding paths with soft, natural light. The air smelled of alien blossoms and growing things. It was the most beautiful place Daniel had ever seen. Eth waited at the center of the garden beneath a canopy of glowing vines. She wore ceremonial robes instead of armor, soft flowing fabric that made her look almost gentle despite her towering frame and 4 powerful arms. In her hands, she held 4 ceremonial blades, each one ancient and precious. Daniel walked toward her and stopped an arm's length away. His heart was pounding, but not from fear. This time it was something else entirely. "You came," Eth said softly. "Did you think I would not?" She smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "I thought you might realize what you were getting into and change your mind. Bonding with me means becoming part of culture forever. It means learning our ways and accepting our traditions. It means standing beside me through challenges that would break most beings." Daniel reached out and took one of her hands in both of his. "I have been broken before. It did not stick." Oran emerged from behind a flowering tree. The old historian moved slowly, but his eyes were bright with joy. He had agreed to officiate the ceremony personally, an honor usually reserved for royal bondings. "We gather today to witness something unprecedented," he announced. The first sacred bond between human and a union that bridges not just two hearts but two civilizations. Daniel and Eth faced each other as Oran continued. The bond requires blood freely given. Each partner must trust the other enough to accept their blade. Each must prove that they would rather bleed than live without the other. Eth handed Daniel one of the ceremonial blades. Its edge caught the light from the glowing flowers. "This will hurt," she warned him. "I know." Daniel took the blade without hesitation. "I have learned that some things are worth the pain." Eth guided his hand to her primary arm. He made a small, precise cut and watched purple blood well up from the wound. Then she took his hand in hers and did the same, adding his red blood to the blade. Oran began to chant in the old tongue. The words were ancient and powerful, sounds that had bound warriors together for thousands of years. Daniel did not understand them, but he felt their weight settling over him like a warm blanket. Their blood mingled on the blade. Red and purple became something new, something neither had been alone. "By blood and blade and unbreaking heart," Oran intoned, "these two are now one. What challenges come, they face together. What enemies rise, they defeat together. What joys arrive, they share together. From this moment until their final breath, they are bonded." Eth looked down at Daniel with eyes full of emotion no warrior should possess. "When you mocked our tradition in that banquet hall, I wanted to destroy you. I thought you were everything wrong with the galaxy. Arrogant, ignorant, unworthy of respect." "I was those things," Daniel admitted. "Yes, but then you showed me something else. You showed me a heart that refused to surrender, a spirit that could not be crushed, a human who fought not for himself but for an idea he believed in." She cupped his face in her upper hands. "You showed me what the sacred bond truly means. Not possession, not conquest, but finding someone worth becoming better for." Daniel felt tears running down his cheeks. He did not try to hide them. "I thought I would never believe in bonds again. I thought my heart was too broken to heal. But you taught me that being broken is not the same as being finished. You taught me that pain can become strength if you refuse to let it win." Oran stepped back and allowed them their moment. Around them, the garden seemed to glow brighter, the flowers responding to the emotion filling the space. Eth pulled Daniel close, lifting him effortlessly so their faces were level. "In culture," she said quietly, "this is when the bonded pair makes their first promise to each other. What do you promise me, husband?" Daniel thought about everything he had learned in the past 3 months, about honor and human stubbornness, about love that crossed the stars and bonds that survived impossible odds. "I promise to stand beside you," he said, "not behind you and not in front of you, beside you, through every challenge and every joy, through every battle and every peaceful day. I promise to be worth the pain it took to find you." Eth pressed her forehead against his. "And I promise to protect your unbreakable heart with all 4 of my hands, to honor the stubbornness that brought you to me, to love you not despite your human weakness but because of your human strength." They stood together in the glowing garden as the first bonded pair in history between their two species. Proof that sometimes the greatest unions came from the most unexpected challenges. Somewhere in the distance, Daniel heard music playing, human and instruments blending together into something beautiful. He had come to the stars running from a broken heart. He had found something far better than he ever imagined. He had found home,